Timothée Chalamet gave us a great performance as Paul Atreides in Denis Villeneuve's first two Dune films, but in Dune Part 3 the character becomes a much more difficult one to pull off. In Herbert's Dune Messiah book, Paul is no longer the youthful Duke or even the newly victorious Messiah, he's an emperor weighed down by the consequences of his own legend. He sits on the throne of a vast empire, but that empire has been spread and ruled through a holy war carried out in his name, something he both foresaw and feels powerless to stop. Paul is deeply conflicted as outwardly he appears as the godlike Muad'Dib, a figure of worship and fear, but inwardly he is a man exhausted by the crushing weight of prophecy, expectation and bloodshed. With this, there's the potential for a more emotionally raw and powerful performance from Chalamet, something that exceeds what we got from him previously. Having seen what the director has pulled off with the first two installments, I think he will find a way to make this work, and I have ideas over how he might go about doing so. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing how Denis Villeneuve might go about adapting Paul Atreides for Dune Part 3. There will be spoilers from the Dune Messiah book, so I would recommend not watching this video if you are someone who hasn't fully read Frank Herbert's novel yet. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my content surrounding Dune Part 3 and beyond, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating and subscribing to the channel. But without further ado, let's dive into the character of Paul Atreides in Dune Part 3. Denis Villeneuve has made it clear that his vision for Dune Part 3 is to present Paul Atreides not as a triumphant hero, but as a deeply tragic figure shaped by the consequences of his own rise. In Dune Part 2, Paul's transformation into a conqueror already leans towards the anti-hero as he embraced the mantle of Messiah and launched a holy war. In Part 3, adapted from Frank Herbert's Messiah book, Villeneuve will likely push that arc further, emphasizing Paul's isolation, his grief, and his disillusionment as an emperor. Instead of epic battles and sweeping victories, the focus will be on the personal cost of leadership. This includes his loss of Chani, the burden of fatherhood, and the realization that his prescience has locked him into a destiny he cannot escape. Now, Villeneuve has spoken about wanting to critique the myth of the saviour, and in Part 3 he can finally deconstruct Paul, showing him as a man crushed by the weight of power rather than glorified by it. The tone will likely shift from the spectacle and momentum of the first two films towards something more introspective and politically charged, turning Paul into the embodiment of Herbert's warning about charismatic leaders who become trapped by their own legend. In Messiah, Paul is no longer the youthful heir or reluctant Messiah of Dune, but a ruler burdened by absolute power and the consequences of prophecy. His scenes are often mediative and heavy with irony, showing a man who has achieved what others would call triumph, but who sees only the chains of destiny. Herbert places Paul in moments of quiet reflection, whether in conversations with his sister Alia, his concubine Chani, or the conspirators who orbit him, wrestling with the paradox of prescience. Essentially, the more he sees, the less freedom he possesses. In these moments, Paul emerges less as a triumphant emperor than as a tragic figure, aware that his reign has unleashed a jihad across the universe, killing billions in his name, and yet he's unable to stop that wave without risking even worse futures. Many of his scenes in the book emphasize how estranged he has become from those around him. As emperor, Paul commands loyalty but senses betrayal and resentment, and Herbert uses his interactions to highlight his isolation. With Chani, his tenderness surfaces, but even these intimate moments are tinged with fatalism. And that's because Paul knows that her death is a fixed point in his visions, and this inevitability shapes his every word and gesture toward her. With the Bene Gesserit or the Guild, his dialogue is more sharper and defensive, reflecting the further political chess game he cannot escape. It all aims to show the more human core of Paul and the way his role and prophecy strip him of that. To be honest, the most powerful scenes are the ones where Paul directly confronts the consequences of prescience. Herbert often writes him standing at the edge of a vision, describing countless possible futures like branches of light, with only narrow paths leading to survival. These passages carry a tone of despair rather than triumph, with Paul seeing himself trapped and a prisoner of inevitability. His eventual decision to walk into the desert at the end of the book, blind but guided by inner sight, is both an abdication and an act of fidelity to Fremen custom. It's both a way of rejecting the godlike image imposed on him and as a final act of agency within the trap of prescience. His departure in that conclusion leaves the Empire to Aaliyah and the twins, and Paul becomes a myth rather than a ruler. In these scenes, I think Paul embodies the paradox at the heart of the book, which is the Messiah who must destroy himself to preserve the people, and the ruler who must abandon rule to preserve freedom. Coming to his extended arc in the book, early on we see that Paul is already worn down by the reality of ruling a galaxy. His vision of the future weighs on him, and he knows his name has become the banner for a violent jihad that has spread across the stars, slaughtering billions. Rather than basking in that power, Paul comes across as weary, cautious, and alienated, almost trapped by the very destiny that has elevated him. When he eventually meets with the guild navigator, Reverend Mother Helen Mohiam, and other political rivals, Herbert shows Paul as both commanding and vulnerable. He dominates the conversations intellectually, seeing through their schemes, but his awareness that plots against him are inevitable adds a constant layer of tension to the narrative. These scenes set the tone of paranoia and foreshadow the conspiracy that unfolds. Paul knows that his enemies are moving pieces on a board, but his prescient visions make him hesitate. If he acts too forcefully, he risks unleashing even darker futures. Something to note is that moments he shares with the other characters further give us insight into the evolution of his character since the end of the previous book. For instance, his interactions with Chani put a focus on the emotional impact he has faced and how his relationship with her is him longing for his own humanity to return. He confesses his love, but always under the shadow of doom. He has foreseen that Chani's pregnancy will cost her life, and as both a lover and prophet, he's unable to separate personal happiness from inevitability. The eventual arrival of their children in twins Ganima and Leto II gives continuity to the Atreides line, but for Paul personally, it's the end of his ability to bear the weight of destiny. I recently did a video on how Villeneuve will go about adapting Chani in Part 3, and while I think that he will make big changes to Chani's arc at the beginning of the story, when it comes to Paul, his grief is something that I think will remain throughout. It's the very backbone to his arc and the story in Messiah, so I think Denis is going to stay very faithful when it comes to adapting the aspects that I've just talked about. Furthermore, some of the more intriguing interactions he has, like with say Aaliyah, reveal another side to him that might allow Denis to make some changes for more dramatic effect. As siblings tied by both blood and the burden of prescient awareness, Paul and Aaliyah share a deep connection but also a strain. Aaliyah pushes Paul to embrace the role of God Emperor more fully, while Paul hesitates, still clinging to a sense of his humanity and humility. The dialogue between them highlights Paul's reluctance to become the inhuman figure others expect him to be. So I think that Denis is going to show more of this aspect in his film, and do so with the scenes between Aaliyah and Paul. I think that would also be a way to give more screen time to the two of them on screen, and it would further demonstrate just how cornered Paul is. When you add on all the extra conspiracies, Paul is facing constant pressure from political maneuvering, from the Fremen who still demand his leadership, from the Bene Gesserit and the Guild, and from within his own household. The assassination attempt using the stone burner is obviously the pivotal scene that this all builds towards, and while Paul does survive, he loses his physical eyesight. His prescience allows him to see without eyes, making him even more supernatural to his followers. The event isolates him further, since he must now live entirely within the realm of vision and prophecy, detached from the ordinary world. So in giving us more of his complex relationships, whether it's through the stance of Aaliyah or even Chani at the start with her disagreements, Denis can really make Paul feel more trapped than he is on the page. So what can we expect to be different with Paul in Dune Part 3, and how will Denis approach him? Well, as a whole, the tone shifts entirely with Dune Messiah. Paul is no longer a boy becoming a leader, he is already the Emperor, and Herbert writes him as weary, disillusioned, and almost alien. Gone is the overwhelming sense of discovery, as Paul now knows too much, and Herbert emphasizes the burden of his prescience. Instead of triumph, his inner voice is filled with resignation and dread. I think that Denis will present every scene with Paul as one that carries the weight of inevitability. He knows what's coming, and even in moments of affection, like with Chani, or the sharpness with his enemies, there's likely to be a fatalistic undercurrent. Unlike in the first films, where Paul is still humanized by his struggle, in Part 3 he will feel much more detached. In the original Dune book and the films, he's often active in physical trials through fights, desert survival, and daring escapades. In Part 3, I think he'll feel a lot more static, surrounded by core advisors and conspirators. His struggles are mostly internal or symbolic, whether it's losing his eyesight, enduring assassination attempts, or weighing possible futures. So the Paul of the first book and films embodies agency, whereas the Paul of Part 3 can embody entrapment. This mirrors Herbert's larger idea for Dune and one that Villeneuve has emphasised he is fully focused on. Herbert intended Paul not as a hero, but as a cautionary anti-messiah, showing how a messianic figure who seems triumphant in one story can become tragic in the next, once power and prophecy strip away freedom. Dune presents Paul as a human becoming more than human, while Dune Messiah presents him as a more than human figure trying desperately to remain human. So for me, that is the big aspect that Villeneuve will centre his film around, and Paul's actions and the way he is presented will be to communicate that very idea. As touched on previously, where Part 2 often showed Paul in grand sweeping action and locations, Part 3 is likely to bring him into an interior, more emotionally and morally fraught space. The director's intention has been to critique the myth of messianic authority, and here Paul will be writing not just in blood and prophecy, but also in grief and sacrifice. In Part 3, I think Paul Atreides will emerge as a far more tormented, morally ambiguous figure compared to the driven, conquering emperor of Part 2. He'll be haunted by the consequences of the Holy War, isolated by the weight of power, emotionally fractured by Chani's absence at the start, and yet fighting to secure a future through his children. His power will still radiate through his prescience and reputation, but his posture toward it will be far more introspective and tragic. Part of this approach can only be elevated by the way Villeneuve depicts the film and the way Timothee brings this version of Paul to life. I've said in other videos that I think Dune Part 3 is going to be more focused on the emotion and drama of the story than the first two ever were. And this may be a big challenge for the audience, especially with a majority of the book taking place in just one location at Arrakis City, with Paul and a few other characters. It's not a sweeping epic like, say, the first two films were allowed to be, because it captures its weight more introspectively. Paul is a reflection of that tonal shift, and I do think that Denis will stay true to that. Yes, I also think he'll add moments to heighten the portrayal of action and epicness within the saga, but I still think he'll keep what makes Messiah so interesting as a story, and that is through the internal torment that Paul faces. But that was my video discussing how Denis Villeneuve could adapt Paul Atreides in Dune Part 3. We'll have to see how the director approaches his final Dune film, but in thinking about some of the iconic moments, characters, and plot points, I think he can make a brilliant conclusion to his adaptation. It'll definitely be a hard task, but like with Part 1 and 2, he proved that it can be done, adapting a novel known as once being unfilmable into a sci-fi classic. But let me know down below in the comment section what you are personally excited for surrounding Dune Part 3, alongside how you think Denis Villeneuve will go about adapting the project and the character of Paul Atreides. For much more videos and news on Denis Villeneuve's Dune universe, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, rating, and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.